Hello and welcome. My name is Madeline Longoria Garcia, and these are our other stories. Today, we're joined by Maya Nguyen, who is the owner of Uncommon Coffee in Vermont and a friend to many. And I'm going to stop it there because you added a friend to many coffee people, but I think you are a friend to many, full stop, just there. So thank you, Maya, for being here and participating.
Yeah, thank you.
How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. I thought my oven was broken this morning and someone else had used it and turned it off wrong and it was fine. So that was a great surprise.
Great. No broken oven. Awesome.
No broken oven.
Good. Just user error. So, yes, I am introducing pretty much every episode this season the same way. We're sharing stories of folks migrating to and from the United States, also touching on people moving to and from other places around the world and those stories and experiences, whether it's them themselves or even just sharing their family's history and story and what that experience was like as, first gen or second gen. And I know for you, we have never had an in-depth conversation about this. I think most of what we know maybe about each other's family histories is just whatever we've shared and seen of each other share on social media. And you've said that your family's history is super interesting and dynamic. And so I'm very interested to hear more about it too. And I usually just invite people to kind of like start wherever you want to, introduce yourself, and whatever starting point in your family's life that you want to share, go for it.
Cool. Thank you. So, this is a really interesting topic for me. And I think a lot of people who know me have heard me speak on this, and especially around like being a mixed person who grew up in a 94% white state was a really interesting experience. I looked super Asian as a kid, and that definitely affected me a lot as a child. And now I don't, and it doesn't affect me as much in the same ways, but I'm navigating sort of cultural differences, language barriers, and the like in different ways as an adult. I'll give some background first. I think that's always a nice place to start. So my dad is a Vietnamese refugee, and actually the town that my cafe is in is the town that he settled in when he first came to the US. So he stayed with a very Irish Catholic foster family and went to Irish Catholic school, which was interesting for him as a Vietnamese Buddhist person first landing in the United States.
How old was he?
When he left Vietnam, he was about 14. So his journey is probably the most traumatic of any of my family, just because, so my grandma had 10 kids. One of them died shortly after birth. So there were 9 of them together growing up. And she had 6 girls first. So she had 6 girls and then 4 boys. And in Vietnamese culture, especially for my grandpa, he was very strict and he was very traditional. There are generations and generations of Buddhist people. When they were growing up, my grandma used to have like a big calendar of the anniversary of all of their relatives' deaths. They would have a like ceremony at the ancestral altar for all of them. And the household, to my grandpa, it was super important to have a son. And he made that very, very clear to the 5 living girls who were growing up in his house before my grandma gave him a son, I suppose. And, so he had a son, my dad, and that was a huge deal for them. He had actually been, according to my aunt, he had been considering taking a different wife to bear a son.
Oh my gosh.
Because my grandma was not giving him a son, and he was not happy about it.
Right.
So their story is interesting too, because it's very atypical. They were affluent. He worked pretty high in the government. They lived in Saigon. and he had status, he had power, and they had money. Like, they had enough money that every one of their 9 living children had their own room in their house. You
Oh,
know,
wow.
I looked back when my grandma was in the respite house recently, I looked back at family photos, and I never met my grandpa. So I was looking at a photo of my grandma next to a man, and I was like, is this my grandpa? Because I've only seen a few photos. And my aunt was like, that's our driver. And I was like, okay, cool. He was
Okay.
like, we had 2
Yeah.
drivers.
Whoa.
Okay. So um, they certainly weren't a typical, like, they're not representative of the experience of most people of that era. You know, it was the
Yeah.
70s. And seeing them kind of go through this process, and I'll dig into that in a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But it certainly is interesting how everything that happened way back then and into when across a large span of time they arrived in the US, seeing how that has impacted their relationships today, which
Mm-hmm.
is super relevant to me right now because my Vietnamese grandmother just passed. And so we've
Mm.
been, all of that stuff that was sitting under the surface has come back up to the surface
Sure.
in our family in a very real way.
Sure.
So for my dad, he was 13 or 14. He would have been sent off to fight in the military. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why there was this urgency of getting him away. And according to my family, sort of like everyone's kind of dream of escaping Vietnam in that era was to go to the US. And a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
ended up in a lot of places. You know, my aunt has friends she went to school with who ended up various countries around Europe, in Australia, in Singapore, and Thailand. But according to her, the dream for most people was to go to the United States. So I didn't mention also, my grandma was a school nurse, but she was the director of all of the school nurses. So that
Okay.
was another layer to just my family having status, having a little bit more money than most people. And that also contributed to how they kind of got by after my grandfather passed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so they paid this guy they knew who did deliveries, like land deliveries from Laos to Vietnam. He would come into the city where they were, he'd do these deliveries. They paid him, and they had my dad pose as his son to cross back through the border with him.
Mm-hmm.
And to do this, my dad had to get way, way, way tanner. And, you know, they were in Southeast Asia. My dad has really dark skin anyway. But that was part of it, was being able to kind of pull one over on the border
Mm-hmm.
people who were checking the papers to be like, yeah, he totally looks like your son. And my dad actually has written a book about his experience coming to the US as a
Oh,
refugee,
wow.
which he's like self-publishing at this point, but he's an educator and he's really focused on like bringing these stories to the forefront in
Mm-hmm.
like secondary education as well. But I remember the first time I heard him talk about it, I was in 4th grade and he came to my school to, I don't know if it was like a show and tell thing. I mean, I didn't have to do anything. He just came and talked about his experience as a refugee. And my
Mm-hmm.
classmates thought it was so cool. They were
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, your dad did all this stuff. He is so cool. But I don't think that, like, I remember so vividly that day because I didn't know. And it's your dad, you know, you think,
Oh.
oh yeah, I know
Mm-hmm.
stuff about my family. I know my parents, they're always there. But as we get older, you know, I think we realize how little we know about our family's lives before we were in the picture.
Yeah.
So he crossed the border into Laos and
Mm-hmm.
from there moved on foot to Cambodia. He was kind of bouncing through different refugee camps. And, you know, this is a very quick summary of his experience.
Sure, of course.
Eventually, he was able to get aid from, like, you know, because the Red Cross and whoever else were around and were trying to, like, help at these refugee camps, were able to find him passage on a plane to the US. So that was his experience. And There's actually like a really old newspaper article I found from like the town paper that my mom grew up in about, it's like a 2-page huge spread about mapping out like everywhere he went, all the refugee camps he was
Mm,
at, and following his journey to the US that's from like probably the 80s.
wow. Um, why do you know why he had to get to Laos first?
Just because that's the land border that's closest to them, you know,
Okay.
through
Okay.
Laos. And so that was kind of his experience. And him and my oldest aunt were the two people who came to the US first. So she had kind of a similar story. She wasn't in refugee camps the same way, and the aid she
Hmm.
received was quite different, but they were corresponding by mail during this time. So, one of the points of contention that exists between them today is my dad is always like, she scammed me out of all the money I had when I was a refugee. She was like, according to him, she was like, my friend is in the refugee camp. You need to give that money to her. I'll pay you back. And so it was like, you know, he knew people who had sent him very small amounts of money from Europe who
Hmm.
had already left Vietnam or whatever. And
Hmm.
he gave my aunt's friend that money, not realizing that like borrow meant like you're never gonna get this money
Hmm.
back. And so
Hmm.
it's such an odd thing because this still comes up today in 2025. That happened in the 70s.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be like, get over it because it
Yeah.
happened to you at the most vulnerable time of your life,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
Um, so my aunt, I don't actually know how she started her journey, but she was, my understanding is somewhere in Southeast Asia, kind of closer to the coast, and that she had made friends who volunteered in the American Red Cross, and they
Mm.
helped her kind of get passage to the US by plane as well. When I was speaking with my aunt, who I'm closest to, who lives close to me, my aunt Lawn, she told me that most people would take a boat to Thailand or to a different part of Southeast Asia and then
Hmm.
continue their journey from there. But I'm not sure if that's what my eldest aunt had done or not. But she and my dad both came to the US around the same time. She got here a little bit after him. And because she's much older than him, she was able to establish herself in a completely independent way. You know, he was a teenager. He was going
Yeah.
to Irish Catholic high school, and she came and she had people who her friends in the Red Cross connected her with. So she did ESL and all of that. And she had learned English in school as well because she went to a private Catholic high school, which is
Okay.
interesting for my family because they are
Yeah.
all Buddhists. So I do have 3 aunts who are Catholic. And I asked my family, like, why, if all of our ancestors are Buddhists, like, why do I have these 3 aunts who are Catholic? And they said that our grandfather really wanted them to have a better education and a better future. So
Hmm.
since he could afford to send them to private school, and the private school was the Catholic school, that's what he chose to do. Um, but it does have a really
Yeah.
interesting role in our family dynamics today.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I feel like even growing up as kids, and so, you know, three of your kids are going to a Catholic school, but I assume maybe at home they're practicing Buddhism as a family unit. Like that's just interesting. Yeah.
It is. So the way that my aunt explained it to me is they had the Catholic altar upstairs and then the Buddhist altar downstairs. So
Okay.
if there was like time where they needed to do something for the ancestors or whatever,
Hmm.
the Catholic people would go upstairs and do that, and the Buddhist people would stay
Wow.
downstairs. Um,
Wow.
so it's a little bit odd, but I think it got them to where they wanted to be. And it seems like everything my grandparents did, especially in such a time of intense turmoil and just a sense of like not knowing that you're going to have safety or be secure, it seems like everything they did was really just in the best interest of keeping people safe. Like that
Hmm.
was top priority. So my aunt was here working at one of the schools I know this because she's often referenced like leading school trips with her friend Benny, her best friend, they were roommates forever. And even to this day, they're very close. And she and my dad, even when they were both here, just never saw eye to eye. I think there's always been this odd dynamic between eldest sibling and eldest boy.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad always talks about like my Aunt Nguyen being jealous of him for the attention he got. She never got the nicest things anymore. They all went to him. And so I think there is this kind of push-pull dynamic there where, yes, your older sister is still your elder, but within your culture, within your family, and coming from your father, you're getting this messaging that, like, you are,
Mm-hmm.
the continuation of the family. So I still see that come up and be very relevant today. But yeah,
Yeah,
my
family
dad,
dynamics are wild like that. I
they're
mean,
so weird.
yeah, yeah.
So my dad was fairly settled here. He got like a full ride scholarship to the University of Vermont and was able to pursue higher education. And to this day, he has like 2 master's degrees and he's getting his PhD right now. And education
Wow.
has always been a very, very important part of his life, which is kind of funny because if you ask anybody who knew him when he was young and still in Vietnam, they used to rank the kids in the class. So if you were like number one, they'd know, like you'd know who was number one and who was like the
Yeah.
last person. And he was always like one of the last people. Like he had like the poorest grades and stuff. But I always wonder if it's like something about getting uprooted when you're young and
Yeah.
not having that opportunity and going through that and just wanting better for yourself, especially if you saw some of your older siblings go to this private Catholic school. It might be something that your values shift a little bit. Um, After those two were established in the US, so there were 2 more kind of boat trips attempted by my
Mm-hmm.
family. And 2 of my dad's brothers passed away. They're presumed dead, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
no one from that boat ever was heard from again from their family. So there was a storm then, and they're probably passed
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And then my Uncle Bang, my Aunt Fung, and my Aunt An all were on a boat that this is fuzzy. Anytime someone tells me something, it's like hard to work out the details because we also have a little bit of a language barrier. But
Mm-hmm.
it seems like their boat stopped in Singapore for 6 months. And during that time, they all kind of just had to figure out how to live until they could make it
Yeah.
the rest of the way to the US. So that was some hardship for them, certainly. And then once my oldest aunt got actual citizenship, she was able to sponsor my Aunt Lon, who's the aunt who I'm closest to, my grandma, and the other sister to come over to the U.S. as well. But
Hmm.
even after that happened, it took them 10 years for that to all
Yeah.
go through and to be able to come to the U.S. So during that
Were
time,
they?
yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
During that time, they're living their lives and they have this idea like, I can't continue living my life because I need to get to the US. Like, my Aunt
Mm-hmm.
Lon was telling me when I was on the phone with her that she was not allowed to date anyone. She was between the ages of 22 and 32. Apparently, she had a lot of suitors approaching her. She was teaching at the school and she's very social and she's very beautiful. And so apparently all these people who had like nieces and nephews in the school would send their niece and nephew with a letter to her, like a love letter,
Oh my
and she would
gosh.
be like, no, because my grandma didn't want her to get pregnant in
Mm-hmm.
case they suddenly had to go to the US. It would have been more
Mm-hmm.
difficult for them with a child or if she were pregnant.
Were they, so they were in Vietnam this whole time or
Yeah.
elsewhere? Okay, this is in
They were in
Vietnam. Okay.
Vietnam, and actually, I totally forgot about my grandfather. So, because my grandfather worked for the government and the communist government was like taking over, right? He
Mm-hmm.
was sent to a prison camp in Vietnam. He was sent to a prison camp, and he was tortured there. And when he was returned home, he did not remember anybody. He had completely lost his mind, and then he died shortly thereafter. So at that point, my dad and my aunt Nguyen were in the US already, and they received like a letter basically saying what happened. But they weren't able to like be there for the funeral or whatever.
Yeah.
And that sort of put the family in an interesting position as well. You know, like that's a lot of stuff happening. It's loss of income, it's an emotional toll, and because they were pretty well off and there was so much civil unrest, they ended up selling the house, which by the way was not simple like it is in the US right now, right? If you have a communist government taking over and you want to sell your house, you need to like go through some hoops to do that. So after, when it was just a few aunts and my grandma left and they were looking to do that, my aunt was telling me that she had to like, the common thing would be like, oh, you take the officials out and you get them drunk and then they sign your papers. But she didn't drink. She wasn't allowed to do a lot of stuff. So she went and like made friends with all their wives so that their wives would be like, hey, you have to sign these papers. And she used her social skills to do that. So that's very interesting. But once the rest of my family got here, it was the early 90s. So I think it was the year before I was born. It was 1992. And I see all these pictures of my grandma like in her winter coat with the snow around her. And this is like completely foreign for them. And there's, I remember my foster family used to always tell me like, oh, the first night Bao, your dad was here, they couldn't communicate with him. They basically could just smile at each other a little bit.
Right.
And they always said that he had a foster brother who was about his age. And they brought the foster brother in the next morning and they were like, look at what a good job Bao did making his bed. You should be like him. But he actually hadn't untucked the bed. Like he didn't know.
So, to sleep underneath the covers. Yeah.
Because if you grow up in Southeast Asia, you maybe don't think about that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the general outline of how my family got here and what their whole deal is. I know it's like a lot of names and it's a lot of stuff to remember, but essentially, I mean, I think we're really lucky that most people made it here. I don't think everyone could say that. And my aunt was kind of going into the cost that took, because for every person, you need to be able to pay like boat fare. And she told me that she had a couple of attempts to like sneak out before they had like a legal pathway to exit when she was a teenager, that failed, where they're looking for people who are trying to escape. They have the big like spotlight thing, and she was like, yeah, they shine the light, and I hid, and then I had to sneak away and get like a bus or something back to the city. So that, I'm sure, was a very scary experience. She talks about it now and she's like laughing and smiling. But at the time, as a teenager, that has to be very frightening,
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about like the costs to even get to the United States, right? The boats, the planes. Did the siblings who were younger all end up in different foster families or with different families? And
so I know my dad had a foster family. I don't know if anybody else did, because after my eldest aunt was here, she was already an adult, she had her roommate, and I don't know if they bought a house. I don't think they bought a house, but they were renting a house. And many of my other aunts and uncles had stayed at that house at some point. So they all, to the best of my understanding, most of them landed in Vermont and went from here. I actually don't know, though, the 3 that went together, if they ever came to Vermont, because nobody has talked about that. And mostly I know about their lives after they already kind of like were things in the US.
Sure.
You know, so one of
So
my
where did they end up, I guess? Yeah.
yeah, one of my aunts married an American man, my uncle Mike. He and they had two kids, so they actually ended up, she and my two cousins were living in Singapore for a while. I think
Mm,
my uncle Mike was quite well off, and they were in private school in Singapore, but he lived in New York, and
mm,
he passed away from cancer, and they all moved back to the US at that point. So I actually remember I was growing up, my dad lived in Florida, my uncle Mike passed away. I probably met him, but I don't remember, kind of
yeah.
thing. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember that they came to Florida to stay with us while they were kind of settling, and then they lived in Florida. But that was really interesting because that was maybe only the second time I had met my two cousins and in my
Mm-hmm.
memory.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad had a one bedroom apartment because my parents divorced when I was really young. So
Mm-hmm.
my memories of that time are so funny. Like, he has this shitty one bedroom apartment in Orlando, Florida, and I am staying there. My sister is staying there.
Oh my
My two
gosh.
cousins are staying there. My dad lives there, and then my aunt Fung, my cousin's parents, or their mom, and then my aunt Nguyen came to support as well. So
Oh
there were
my
seven
gosh.
of us.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
We had the
Yeah.
air mattress. My dad had his bed, and then we had the couch. And it was so hot. The air
Oh my
conditioner in
God.
this
Yeah.
car was broken. I was so upset about the air conditioner. I was probably the biggest brat, but that was tough. But my cousins both, it seems like they're both doing really well, and they had a good time growing up in Florida. But I know that when my grandmother recently passed away, my
Mm-hmm.
aunt, their parents talked a lot about, her husband's passing and that experience and what it was like for her. Because I don't think that our family felt particularly close at any point. In
Mm,
Vietnam, as kids, most Vietnamese families aren't as affluent as ours was, and so they would all sleep in the same room in the same bed together.
right.
And the way that my aunt, who talked to me about a lot of this, was explaining it, she said they didn't feel as close because, like, oh, if it's thunder or if it's not nice out, they aren't comforting each other. They're all on their own. They're self-soothing.
Yeah.
And then with so many of them leaving at such a young age, they just weren't bonded the way that most siblings are. But
Mm-hmm.
my grandmother was super protective of everyone. She went through hell for these kids, and she was not going
Yeah.
to see anything bad happen to them.
I mean, gosh, even for, I mean, your grandmother coming to the United States, Vermont, like you just kind of painted that picture for us too, this photo of her in this winter coat in the snow, like what a huge difference. And I mean, for everybody, but especially the grandmother at that age and the time and how much time had passed too of like this fracturing off of the family and the kids all being in different places for like over a decade, 15 years. It sounded like.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I mean, just what a wild kind of like web there of everything. And I wonder too, like, I mean, for your dad, and I don't know if you've had these conversations, and part of this too is I hope it encourages people to start having these conversations if they're not with their parents and grandparents, if
Yeah.
grandparents are still alive. But like, I mean, your dad now suddenly being also, in an Irish Catholic family, um, probably, I mean, you said you grew up in a community of 94% white demographic, and he ended up in the US in the 70s.
Yeah. So this is
So,
interesting because
yeah.
he was the only non-Irish Catholic person at that school, the only
Yeah.
one. And
Mhm.
I think for a lot of children of immigrants who grow up in Vermont, they will like really relate to this. Like, I can remember the feeling of being in kindergarten or in first grade, very young, and another kid passed me in the hallway and yelled, "Are you Chinese?" And I was like,
Mm.
"No, I'm Vietnamese." Like, kind of like, "Oh, you're so stupid for not knowing that."
Yeah.
Haha.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you feel really different, you know, like
Yeah.
I think I said this in the intake form that you send out, but like my memory of learning empathy is so specific. And I
Mm-hmm.
do believe to this day that part of that experience was because I was not socially accepted from the get-go. And
Yeah.
whether that has anything to do with what my appearance was or my race, like it could, I don't really know. I always thought it probably has a little bit to do with that just because as a kid, you see people who look like you and you relate to them more easily, you know? I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a very
Mm-hmm.
human thing to do is see people who look like
Mm-hmm.
you and be like, yeah, my people.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in kindergarten. I wanted to play with this cash register toy. And this girl, Lexi Daly, was playing with the cash register toy, so I just shoved her off the chair. And then she started crying, and I cried so hard that day. Our teacher came over and was like, not sure what happened. But I can remember, like, consciously for the first time being like, I know what pain feels like, and that feels
Mm-hmm.
really bad. And I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of kids, and this ties back into my family's relationship with religion as well, for a lot of kids, they're taught empathy through religion, through like,
Mm-hmm.
this is right and wrong because you'll go to hell or whatever, you know, whatever it may
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And I was raised, you know, my mom is white and she is very atheist and my dad was agnostic growing up like
Mm.
because he was so young when he left Vietnam and then he was thrown into this Irish Catholic household. I don't think he felt very strongly either way for most of his life and it's only been in the last 10 years or so that he's really come to Buddhism as like yes, this is what I'm doing. I
Mm-hmm.
am Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Mm-hmm.
I had to learn that through, and I don't think this is a bad thing. I actually think it's a really good way to learn empathy
Mm-hmm.
and to learn right and wrong is through empathy. So that was an interesting experience. And from that day forward, like for years and years, that girl, Lexi Daly, was my best friend. And like, it's funny when my mom was moving to Mexico, we went through all these family things, all these family photos, and like every picture of me as a kid is like me with Lexi. Or, you know, we would write down things in my mom's journals or something, and it would be like, Maya and Lexi did this, Maya and Lexi did this.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
kind of right before my like life started changing, my divorce and my other grandma passing away at the beginning of last year, Lexi also passed away, which was very
Mm.
difficult for me. Like,
Yeah.
it's one of those
Yeah.
weird things. Like, someone means so much to you and you lose touch. And so I think it's similar but opposite of the feeling of like not knowing your family when they were young, right? Like
Mm.
you feel like I know that something I've talked to my cousin a lot about, so I haven't talked about her yet, but my cousin Kim is very very dear to me and she's my aunt Lon's daughter. So my last aunt who came to the US kind of was at the age where she was like I don't think I can have a baby. But
Mm-hmm.
she had gotten married to actually somebody who was on the boat that got stuck in Singapore with my three other aunts and uncles.
Whoa.
And so
Okay.
they got married. And when they got pregnant with Kim, everyone in the family, like, kind of understood that for my aunt who thought this could never happen for her, it was like, I heard a lot of people say it was like a gift from God, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was very exciting for them. And so Kim is quite a bit younger than me. She's 23 right now. I'm 32. So she's almost 10 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she had a very, very, very different upbringing than me with two Vietnamese parents. And I didn't even have a Vietnamese parent in the household growing up. And I remember,
Mm.
like, my mom always tells me that when I was a baby, she asked my dad to just speak to me and my sister in Vietnamese. And he was always like, oh, I'll teach them later. So, like, I don't even have that experience, right?
Yeah.
And for my cousin Kim, she grew up in the same house as my grandma because my grandma and my last aunt to come here, they were very very close, and they lived together for my entire life that I can remember. So that was very significant and a very important relationship for both of them. Kim and my grandma were, my grandma raised her. My aunt was
Yeah.
working, my grandma was home, my grandma raised her. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and especially for the months that my grandma was in the respite house or had the social workers and the nurses coming by their house before she went to the respite house.
Mm-hmm.
Kim and I have spent a lot of time together this year. And she
Yeah.
just finished college when she was, 22. So last year, I guess. Um, and she's been back in Vermont, which has been very nice.
Yeah.
But in recent weeks, she has expressed that like she wishes she asked our grandmother more things about herself or knew about what she was like kind of
Yeah.
before her life. And so I think that it's something we take for granted, like who people are. And in the same way, like when I lost Lexi, I remember talking to her mom after her passing, and her mom had come to the cafe and she came in and we saw each other and we just like hugged and cried and, did the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
her mom was like, yeah, Lexi like came to the cafe one day, but you were out like working on someone's espresso machine. And I remember kind of that day. And when I got back to work from my client's place that day, someone was like, yeah, someone named Lexi was here to see you. And I was like, I don't really know a Lexi unless they mean my childhood best friend. Ha ha ha. Which it was. And I'm like, it's such a bummer that I missed that. But at the same time, like, it's so nice that she was like still thinking about me, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Oh, again, those realizations of retrospectively being like, oh, I could have had this conversation or asked these questions, or, what more would I know and maybe understand if I had the opportunity to have those conversations or thought to ask those questions. And that's, again, that's something that I hope people sharing here, it sparks
Yeah.
that motivation to have those conversations with the elders in our families, because like we have them for a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
And they have us for a limited amount of time too. And I, even with my own grandfather, I remember asking him questions. He had gotten very sick. He was diagnosed with cancer, and there was this week where pretty much the whole family was around. Not everybody, but a
Yeah.
lot of people were around. They had all gone to visit him. And I remember one day sitting outside with him in his backyard with my sister and my dad. And I just like started asking him questions about like what he could remember of coming to the United States and why he did it and what the process was like. But I don't think I really had enough foresight into it of like, what did it feel like though?
Yeah.
I was like trying to get the facts down of like
Yeah.
what are the logistical details, right, of what you did and where you went and all of this stuff. And at the same time, through that conversation, at one point, my grandfather looks to me and he's just like, qué bueno que me preguntas de esto.
Yeah.
Like, how good that you're asking me
Yeah.
about this, And I remember sharing that with a friend afterward, like soon after he had passed. He ended up passing like 4 days after that happened, basically. And she was like, do you think other people, like his other grandchildren, ever asked him these questions? I was like, I don't think so. Like, I don't think my cousins did, And it's one of those things that it's like, man, why don't we have these like it's this, we struggle, I think, to see people past their role in our lives
Yes.
and understanding they are so much more than whatever their role is in our life.
I think we're also taught that too because our parents and our grandparents, like for them, they want you, they see you, they see your future, right? And they want you to be
Mm-hmm.
doing well. And they're always asking about you. You know, like you
Mm-hmm.
go to a family function and your aunts, your uncles, your grandparents, they're all like, oh, what have you been up to? How are you doing? And you might be like, yeah, how are you doing? But I feel like for family, there's this very specific dynamic where you don't always see people as people because you assume that you know them. If
Yeah.
I see a customer in in the cafe, I might be like, "Hey, what do you do, by the way?" But I would never
Yeah.
ask that to a family member, you know, because I'm
Yeah.
like, I know what they do. And it's funny because even like last month during my grandmother's funeral, I realized I don't know what my uncle does. You know? People were like, "Yeah, what does your uncle do?" And I'm like, "I don't know, something like he's some kind of engineer." Or like my cousin, I'm always like, "Yeah, I think he's like a mathematician." But
Yeah.
I don't really know. Like I know what company he works for, but I don't know anything about what he really does.
Yeah.
Um and it is curious. And I think especially for grandparents, like your grandparents are so excited to like have their grandkids in their lives and they don't have
Yeah.
the same responsibility to you that their parents do. Of course they still have a responsibility, but
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like such a joy for them, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something that we're taught as well, is that your grandparents are so happy to have you around and they just want to hear about you. It makes them so happy. And one of the biggest takeaways that I have from the time that I spent with my grandma in the respite house, which was a lot of time, you know, she was at the respite
Mm-hmm.
house for over 2 months, which is very
Mm-hmm.
irregular. They thought that when they sent her to the respite house, they were like, she's probably going to be here like a week or less, just so you know.
Yeah.
Um, but for about half of that time, I was going to see her like every other day. And that caused me a lot of emotional burnout. So I cut
Of
down a little
course.
bit after that. But I realized that she was just trying to soak up as much extra love as she could. You know,
Yeah.
she was like, we had a big language barrier. She did not speak a lot of English. I speak no Vietnamese. I can say
Mm-hmm.
thank you and I can say I love my dad because that's what he taught me. um, the important things.
Yes.
And, you know, we would hold hands, we would smile at each other, and she would use whatever English she had left. And even with like the nurses in the respite house, like would spend time just like holding her hands and smiling at her.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
could see how much her mood improved when people came to visit her more. Like when my
Yeah.
aunts and uncles came from out of town, she was just so happy to be around them.
Yeah.
And I think that like it's so it was such a profound moment for me because I was like, this is actually what really matters. Like the love
Yeah.
we give each other. This is the most important thing. Like that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yes, I totally agree with that. And I want to kind of like talk about the language thing here because
Yeah.
I think this is something that a lot of people just kind of assume maybe that you speak another language because
Yeah.
you have parents who grew up in a different country. And I always tell people the reason why I speak Spanish is because I took myself to Spain and like lived in Spain because I mean my parents didn't teach me,
Yeah.
and it was never it was never something that except for phrases, like small
Yeah.
phrases that we would say growing up, but in like first gen, second gen Latino culture in the US, there's a phrase called the no sabo kid, which
Hmm.
basically means like you
Yeah.
don't speak
You don't know.
Spanish, you don't know Spanish. Um, but yeah, in Vietnamese is such a different language too. So there's a whole extra layer of trying to learn that. Have you ever been to Vietnam?
No. So I actually have a really interesting relationship with my language and my culture.
Yeah.
I when I was very young, before my dad moved away, but after my parents had divorced, we were going to see my Vietnamese family a lot. And I have this like huge feeling of loss around this because I can remember being there so much and completely understanding everything everyone said. And I'm so sure that I was at the point where I was building up the confidence to respond to people. But
Mm-hmm.
then my dad moved and we stopped visiting them a lot and I just lost it, you know. It
Yeah.
happened so fast. But when you're a kid, it's so easy to just
Yeah.
learn languages. That's what you are meant to do during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a few times growing up or as an adult when my dad has been like, hey, I'm organizing a school trip to Vietnam because he's a teacher. And I want you to come with us. Or, this last winter, I was supposed to go to Vietnam with my aunt and uncle. And it just hasn't, it's always fallen through for some reason. I can remember one time my dad was like, these are the dates for the trip, like send me your passport number and stuff. And then like a couple weeks before we were supposed to go, he was like, no, we're not going. And I was like, okay. But that's always been like a big kind of sadness for me, is like, I would love to go and connect with my culture. And then sometimes I have these experiences where I think it would probably be a lot more difficult for me emotionally than I think. We had a ceremony at the temple the other day for my grandma's 49th day after she passed. It's like seven Sundays from the day she passed, which included she passed on a Sunday. And I felt so othered, so like I don't belong. And I know that's not how my family felt about me being there, but it was just one of those things, like all the conditions were right. So my aunt told me to be at the temple at 10:30, right? And I got there and no one was there yet. Like my aunt didn't even get there until 11. And so I walk into the temple and it's just like this very small house on the side of the road with all these like Buddhist statues outside of it in this town in Vermont. And so I knock on the door and the monk answers. And we don't speak a common language. She only speaks Vietnamese. I only speak English. So I was like, oh, I'm here for Luan, like my aunt's name, And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, my aunt told me to bring these muffins. So I had my baker at the cafe make these muffins. I brought the muffins in. And she's like plating them and she's putting them on in the ancestral shrine. Like there's a lot of food offerings for my grandma. And so I go in, I'm early. I don't speak the same language. It's not my religion, so I don't know what to expect. And I try to ask these things leading up to it. I'm like, what's going to happen? What should I wear? Because I don't want to do anything disrespectful. I almost did accidentally. This is funny, but I'm trying. And I think that's what really counts. Like my aunt is always like, oh, you're doing so good by like learning and being open to it, which makes me feel a little better about it. Yeah. But we're going through, there's a couple hours of chanting and kneeling and bowing. And so the monks and my cousin are doing this and they're kneeling for a long time. This house has no air conditioning. It's so hot. It's like over 90 degrees that day. It was like the hottest day of the summer so far. And then after about an hour of them all chanting, they had me and my cousin go right up to the shrine and do some more kneeling and praying. So we go up, we're kneeling on these little meditation pads. The monk would kind of signal us like when to bow. She'd be like 2, and then we would bow. And at some point they handed me a little teacup from the shrine. And I look at the monk because I don't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And she made like kind of like this motion. So I was like, oh, I should drink it. So I put it up to my lips and she like grabbed my hand and she was like, no.
Oh my gosh.
And she just wanted me to put it up to my forehead. But I heard some laughing in the temple, but that was fine. I made it through. But I left that experience. Oh, I will say the one last thing that is extremely difficult for me with my culture. I've been vegan for 17 years. I have never met a Vietnamese person who understands this. Yeah. And it's not something I like to talk about. I don't care to talk about my diet. It's nobody's business, Yeah. But my family knows I'm vegan. They have no idea what vegan means, but they think they do. Yeah. And I think for a lot of them too, like the Buddhist monks are vegetarian, non-harming and what have you. So they think like, yeah, that's the same. But I know that like so much of Vietnamese culture is like fish sauce is a really, really common ingredient in things. Yes. Or like you cook something with meat or in beef broth and they're like, oh, that's not eating chicken or whatever. It is so hard and there's so many eggs. So, the monks and the community prepare this huge lunch every time we have a ceremony like this. And I feel so bad. I feel so guilty not eating this meal, but I know I'm going to make myself sick. I haven't
Yeah.
digested any of that stuff in 17 years.
Yeah.
It's not fair to my coworkers or to myself to like go through that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. I just going through that feeling like I kneeled in front of the altar for like an hour. I knelt in front of the altar for like an hour. I could feel the sweat like dripping down my back. I didn't understand what was happening. People were trying to speak to me in Vietnamese, and my aunt keeps telling people that I understand Vietnamese when I do
Oh
not.
gosh. Oh gosh.
And so, I go home from this experience having said no to the lunch and feeling really guilty about that because they all were like, let me pack a plate of food for you.
Yeah.
You probably just are too hot. Like, have this food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt so isolated and so othered and so like non belonging in that moment. And then my cousin
Mhm.
came over to watch like a shitty rom com with me and have like a little sad girl night. And she was
Yeah.
just like, that's so stupid, Maya. And I was like, you know what? You're right. She was like, everyone is just so happy you're trying. So much of our family didn't
Aw.
even come for this ceremony. And I was like, okay, so true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think as like a
That's
second gen person, it's like, or I never know if I should say that I'm first gen because I'm mixed. I'm like, well, my mom is like, she's been here forever. But
yeah.
I think it's something I think about a lot is like, people don't expect much from me because they
Mm.
know I don't understand. So if they see
Mhm.
me trying, that means a lot to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that kind of like reassurance from your cousin, I mean that's what we need, you
Yeah.
know. I think like yeah, as someone who I'm second gen, you know, so like my dad was born in the United
Yeah.
States. And a couple of years ago, we went to Mexico to do this big trip of like visiting a bunch of family and seeing my great grandparents' ranch, which is still in the family. And yeah, sometimes being like, do I like belong here? You know, is this weird of me to be here and like, you know, doing this? But yeah, those conversations and connections with all of the cousins and whatever, however we're related, the uncles and aunts and everybody, just immediately embracing and being so
Yeah.
happy that I was even there, you know, and I was even there asking questions and curious about the things. Um, I mean, yeah, they were just like, here, take this book. Oh, go to that store. You can get more books about that. Like, here, like, I'm like, okay, cool, great. This is awesome. This is awesome, you know? And I love that. I mean, it is this interesting dynamic that I think so many of us who carry kind of like these multiple cultural identities of like, how do I navigate this? And I don't fully know all of it, but I know some of it and it is a part of me. And yeah, it might be a little bit like messy sometimes, but at the end of the day, the folks who love you are just going to be happy that you're there participating
Yeah.
and engaging. Yeah.
It was a nice experience. Now that I've had some time to kind of recover from it, I'm
Yeah.
very, very glad that I went. And I also feel, you know, my aunt and my grandma were so close, and my aunt took care of her for many, many years. And
Mhm.
none of the rest of the family did, really. And I think
Mm.
I understand it, like everyone came here in survival mode. And
Yeah.
then my last aunt who came with my grandma like didn't really come here in survival mode. It was quite different. And of course, like she came to the US, she started cleaning hotel rooms, she was working two jobs, she was working super hard. Like everyone was working so hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she came here and didn't have an extremely traumatic path to get here. And so
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot of weird resentment around like, I had a tougher time than you because we got stuck in Singapore and had to have like a really bad time there. And like, there's all this stuff about like, oh, I was afraid of getting raped on the boat. Or like, I
Mhm.
know one of my aunts, one of my Catholic aunts did get raped at some point and got
Mm.
pregnant and had an abortion. And as a Catholic person, it
Yeah.
she would not have had that abortion except that a Catholic priest told her it was okay. Like
Yeah.
someone at a refugee camp was like, there was a Catholic priest there, and he was like, it is okay, like God is going to forgive you to have this
Yeah.
abortion. And I
Yeah.
remember, like, after the first time Donald Trump was elected, my aunt, who that happened to, like, she has a prayer group at her local church. She lives in North Carolina, and she sat all of her friends from that community down, and she said, I want you to pay close attention to what's going to happen. And I know you all voted for him because of abortion, but I'm just going to tell you now that, like, you know someone who's had an abortion, and it's me, and a Catholic priest told me
Yeah.
it was okay. And I think that's
Yeah.
just a very interesting, very, very interesting dynamic. And even politically, my family is very divided as well. Like, a lot of Vietnamese people are very, I guess I'll say more broadly that I've seen this phenomenon, at least in my family, where there is this very strong desire to homogenize to American culture. And I think that
Yes.
that's what has informed a lot of people's decisions
Yes.
across the board. So I saw that with my dad as well. You know, like, he came to the US, he went to this Irish Catholic school, he met my mom at college. She is a 6 foot tall, blonde, white woman.
Oh my gosh.
And he proposed to her so many times, and she kept saying no. And then eventually she's like, well, he just pressured me into doing it. I just got sick
Oh
of
my
saying
God.
no. No wonder their marriage didn't work out, right? But
Oh my God.
but he really, like, cultivated his image of the American dream. Like, we had the little
Yeah.
white picket fence, you know, like, after my mom gave birth to me, like, they planted her placenta to nurture the roots of a tree in our yard and stuff.
Mhm.
Like, 2
Mhm.
kids, everything that you could ask for. You know, a soccer coach, teacher at the high school, whatever. And, like,
Wow.
it's so funny, like, having seen my dad's journey through going from that and having his wife leave him, which
Hmm.
was so upsetting for him. Like, he had such a hard time with it. And while that was happening, he was kind of being pushed out of the school district he was in because they were getting rid of all of their minority teachers. So those two things
Whoa.
together, like, he left Vermont after that, and I will say, like, he has a lot of trauma he hasn't processed from being uprooted at a very young age. He has moved every other year of my life. Like, if you average it all out, even to this day, that number still stands. And he's been in California for many years now, but he hasn't stayed in one place in California, even.
Got it. Yeah.
It's a big state. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so seeing him kind of go through that and then come back to Buddhism and then marry a
Hmm.
Vietnamese woman now and now have another child who is, like, completely Vietnamese and is being raised speaking Vietnamese, and
Mm.
really returning to his culture after, for so many years when I was growing up, all of my relatives would be like, well, his Vietnamese is really broken and he doesn't really speak it anymore. And now, you know, he speaks it a lot, and he
Yeah.
lives near Westminster, which has the, you know,
Hmm.
largest Vietnamese population in the U.S. for good reason, because he wants that community and he wants to return to something that is familiar and comfortable and
Yeah.
appeals to that side of him. So
Wow. That's wild. I mean, this, so you touched on a lot there. And one of the things is kind of like this whole process of assimilation and desiring to be just the same and like, no, I'm American. I love this place. You know, somebody else who's been on the podcast, Evan, he talks about like his grandparents lining the driveway with little American flags
yeah,
because they just thought that made them more American for having these flags on their driveway. And um yeah, I mean, other people who are just sharing these ways of even language and how, you know, they didn't speak their native language outside of the home because they didn't want to stick out, you know, and be seen as different when they were in public, even if they still had an accent. Like, okay, at least we're speaking English, you know. And it's such an interesting thing that that's like I don't know, there's this whole period of time where it's like, this is what people were told they had to do in the United States, is like, you assimilate, you become the same, you try to become the same.
You melt in the melting
And
pot, you know?
yeah, exactly. And like with that, what are you losing through that process too? And it seems like with your dad, he's kind of re-embracing these parts of himself maybe that he had let go of previously. And again, in other conversations with people, they're just, it's this, again, this understanding of like, I can hold all of these pieces at the same time and they can all still be me and I can still be them. I don't have to choose one over the other. And yeah, and it's like, I think for a lot of folks too, there is a lot of unprocessed trauma. You know, it doesn't even, and there's a certain, you know, generation that does not feel very excited about therapy.
Yeah.
And so there is this whole like, I feel like I observe this a lot of just like, man, yeah, this is how these traumatic events, which is what they were, are playing out in your current life.
Yeah.
And it had not been socially acceptable to seek out therapy or even like say that you needed help. So you just never did and you never will. And this is just the way that this is playing out now.
Yeah, it's been so interesting for most of my life, my dad was kind of an outsider in my life, so I've been able to observe him from quite a distance for a long time and think about these things. And then basically, like, you know, I mentioned he has another daughter now. When This is so funny. So the summer that he got remarried was like the worst year of my life. You know, I had so much stuff going on, and it was just like, you know how sometimes you go through those seasons of life where it's like one thing after another and everything sucks.
Oh, yes. Oh,
That's
yeah.
what it was. I was probably more depressed than I've ever been. And I remember like that was the summer my dad got remarried. It was in Vietnam. I wasn't allowed to go. I didn't get to go to either of my parents' second marriages, which I don't hold against them. But at the time that happened, I was really hurt. You know, I was like,
Yeah.
you don't want your kid there, whatever. Um,
Wow.
and so my dad married this Vietnamese woman. She came to the US and they had a baby. And I remember when he called me to tell me that Tremon was pregnant, he called me and we were not close. Like when your dad moves away, like further and further away from you as a kid, you feel like he is leaving you, even though in reality, it doesn't really have anything to do with you. It's his own, like, finding a place, right? He was on the path to
Yeah.
finding his own place of his own right. And he called me and he said, Maya, guess what? And I said, what? And he said, I finally got an iPhone. And I was like, that's so great, Dad. Like, I remember, like, I had just gotten out of my, like, I had like a Prius at the time, and I was in like one of my first alone apartments, and I'm standing outside of my apartment next to my car, and I'm having this conversation with my dad, who never calls me, by the way, about his iPhone. And I'm like, yeah, that's great, awesome, like good for
Cool.
you. Are you happy to be part of the club or whatever? And then we hang up, and he calls me back, and I'm like, what? And he's like, Tremon is pregnant. And I'm like, dog, you called me to tell me that and you forgot to tell me that. Like,
Oh my gosh.
so, yeah, that I was 23 when she was born, and
Wow.
she is, you know, entirely Vietnamese. She looks a lot like my sister, though, who has always looked a bit whiter than me, which I think is very interesting. And when she was born, I told myself that I was going to break this weird cycle of bitterness that happens in my family, right? It's like, oh, my dad is really bitter towards my mom for leaving him, and I'm bitter at my dad for like moving away after that. And I was like, oh, I can just like end it. Like, I just
Yeah.
don't have to participate in that. So I went out to
Yeah.
California to see him and to meet her, and to meet him really as an adult for the first time. And that was a
Mm-hmm.
really significant step in my life. And I can remember at the time being really upset at my older sister because she caught wind of my trip and she like wanted to go see her friends in California or something. And so she had him like pay for her flight out. And I was like, she's using him, like her intentions, whatever. And really, the most impactful part of that whole trip, I was pissed at my older sister. I was like, that was a shitty reason for her to go. I don't
Yeah.
know. Like, that makes me uncomfortable. And so I can remember when my dad was driving me back to the airport to go back home, I was venting to him about it, which is not something I was used to. I was like, aren't you mad at Lydia because she just basically ditched us on this trip? And he said something that I thought was so emotionally mature, and I never expected it from him, certainly, because
Hmm.
to this day, if he has to write a check to my mom, he refuses to write her new last name. Like, through the end of when he had to pay child
Yeah.
support, he would address the
Hmm.
check to just Carolyn. Like, any Carolyn in the world could have cashed that check. That's crazy.
Jesus. Yeah.
So he said, Lydia will come around when she's ready, and I'll be here, but I can't force it.
Hmm.
I was like, damn, that is such a healthy outlook. And it made me kind of mad. That did too, because I was like, how can you have such a healthy outlook on this when she is like using you?
Yeah.
But I think that going through everything he did, not as a refugee, but as an adult, as a
Yeah.
real adult, like, and also the process of like coming back to Buddhism, and that's probably part of why he came back to Buddhism, was because of this idea that like we are going to go through shit. We're going to
Yeah.
suffer. And like if you are too attached to this whatever desires you may have, it's gonna hurt you, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely a result of returning to Buddhism. I
Yeah.
think, and it's hard. That kind of work is really hard to get there. Um, but I also, so I wanted to ask a couple of questions
Yeah.
just as you were sharing some of these things. Um, Going back to your dad has been to and from Vietnam several times over
Yeah.
the years. I mean, I guess he was allowed to. I don't really know like what the status was
Yeah.
of I've had conversations with folks who do have refugee status in the United States but never have become full citizens, and so they are limited. They can't travel freely internationally, or they risk losing their status in the United
Mhm.
States. But I also know with the political relationship and situation, and especially because your family was involved in politics in Vietnam. Yeah, I'm curious if you have any information or insights there.
He's been a citizen for a long time. I don't know when he
Hmm.
became a citizen, but certainly before I was born. So I'm not
Yeah.
sure if that's something that his foster family helped him with, or if it was something that he did after college. And then, of
Hmm.
course, maybe it was something he did when he was married to my mom. I don't know. I haven't seen pictures of his, like, they, a lot of families, they have pictures of like the
The
ceremony and stuff.
ceremony. Yeah.
I haven't seen any pictures of that. And so I have no real sense of when that happened.
Okay.
Um, but it's certainly been more than my entire life. And I think the other element here that I haven't mentioned is that my Aunt Nguyen, my oldest aunt, and her husband are very politically connected as well. Like, he is a lawyer. He worked at the US Department of Commerce in embassies around the world his entire career. And my
Yeah.
Aunt Wynne would go with him and do odd jobs, whatever the embassy needed her to do, and also do
Hmm.
volunteer work in the countries that they lived in. So they've lived in Vietnam, they've lived in the Vatican City, he's lived in Korea. Like, they've lived all over the world, they've traveled all over the world, and we're very lucky. And because of those connections, like, my aunt has sponsored so many people to come to the US, like outside of our own family
Hmm.
too. She has gone way out of her way to help people get
Wow.
citizenship, get like a legal pathway to be here. And that's something that she's always been really passionate about.
Yeah. That like sponsorship piece is something that I don't think a lot of people realize is a thing. And in a lot of Latino communities, it actually ends up being the kids who become their parents' sponsors once
That's
they
interesting.
once they become it's once you turn 21, you become eligible to sponsor your parent, which is a whole other dynamic too that I think is like this weight of responsibility for a lot of kids. Anyway, but that's a whole different conversation and topic. But another question I had, and this is going back a little bit, is you said that the school district was getting rid of all of the minority teachers at one point. And do you know, like, what
Yeah.
was that about?
So, as I mentioned, like Vermont is a very, very white place. That's something that
Mm-hmm.
I think about a lot as a mixed person and as somebody who, as growing up, was viewed as like very like I wasn't viewed as a mixed person. I remember
Mm-hmm.
being in middle school and people being like, "Hey, I know this other Vietnamese guy. You guys should date," and like that kind of thing. And
Great. Thank you.
so
Yeah.
I did date Tom Lee. Shout out to Tom Lee. But it's so funny. Like, it's not funny. I mean, I don't know because I'm not my dad. I don't know his experiences.
Sure.
I do know that every teacher I've talked to from Essex, and there's so many because it's the school that I went to, and they come into my cafe now. They all have very, very nice things to say about my dad as a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, as a coach, and the like. And he like won Teacher of the Year a couple of times and stuff. And there were no minority teachers in Essex when I went there. There was one teacher who my dad actually helped her get a job who was European and she was an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I started in her class, she was like, "Your dad helped me get this job." And I was like, "Oh, that's sick." But
Mm-hmm.
my dad was going through this divorce, was kind of being pushed out of his school district, and he sought legal action against the school. And I don't think anything ever materialized out of it. I think that he, at a certain point, kind of had to cut his losses there. But
Yeah.
that is something where, as a kid, many times I saw my dad, you know, I don't know if he lost jobs or if he chose to leave a lot of jobs. You don't really know when you're a kid, but
Yeah. Yeah.
he changed jobs and he would move. And most of the time he would be like, "They're so racist. They're so racist." And I think that I was never sure if, like, what percentage of that was real,
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I've struggled with a lot. Just because a lot of it probably was legitimate, especially if you think about like, my mom will talk about being in an interracial marriage in the 90s and how difficult that
Mm-hmm.
was. Um, and she often has told me that like, people would say things to them in the grocery store. They would like yell at my parents or
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. Or I know when I was a baby and I looked so Asian, my mom was carrying me in a department store one day and this lady came up to her and was like, "My sister adopted a little Chinese baby too." And my mom was like, "No, this
Oh
is
my
this
gosh.
is mine." Like,
Yeah. I gave
um,
birth to this child.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
thank you, though. That is
Mm-hmm.
so cool about your sister. And I think it's a weird thing because you walk this tightrope. Like, I don't want to delegitimize anything my dad is saying. And I think it's
Mm-hmm.
really important to take those things very seriously. But I also see certain patterns in my dad because he's my dad.
Sure.
And I know that, like, he does this thing where he wants to move. He doesn't feel settled because he was uprooted at a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And that's challenging. And then I know that there are a lot of very real institutional racism things happening, especially when you talk about something like the public school systems. And
Yeah.
so I see him going through his PhD now in school administration. And one of the things he's very, very passionate about is how to make equitable workspaces and what the value of having diversity is within your
Mm-hmm.
classroom, within your school district. And I think it's a lot more comfortable for him in California because there's so much more diversity there. It's so
Yeah.
much more normal. And he is always talking about like all of the different cultures his students come from and how that impacts his classroom. Um,
Yeah.
So, yes, he did go through that. That was challenging. And I think that he just had so much loss happening at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, his whole American dream shattered within the course of like
Right.
a year or a couple of years.
Yeah. And I mean, after that, it being pretty much you, your sister, and your mom. And other than that comment from a woman in that department store when you were a baby, was that like a recurring theme in your childhood at all of just
To some extent,
being
yeah. I mean, my mom and I didn't have the same last name. We never have, except, I mean,
okay.
after she got divorced, we never have.
Yeah.
And that, because we don't look alike, I think she got a lot of questions about, is this really your daughter? And I
Yeah.
know that that was challenging for her at times, especially because she had custody. She was our legal guardian. And
Mm-hmm.
um, it posed some logistical challenges. I will say
Yeah.
that my mom is an extremely, extremely smart woman, and she navigated those things, in my opinion, very well. I know, like, for most of my childhood, my mom was working nights in the post office in the mail processing plant. So once she stopped working nights, that was a huge game
Mm-hmm.
changer because she was actually sleeping, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I will also say that my stepdad, John, moved in with us when I was about 7. And even though he and my mom didn't marry for quite a long time, like he absolutely raised me. And
Yeah.
it's been really cool to see, like, I think growing up in an environment where your parents do really love each other, and I'm saying my parents as my mom and my stepdad,
Yeah.
it made a huge impact on my life just to
Of
grow up
course.
with that example of like, what is love and what should this
Of
like
course.
look like and feel like. And
Yeah.
so I know that once he was in the picture, he was able to support her a lot with those things as well.
Yeah, my parents also divorced when I was very young, but they both have roots in Mexico, and so I guess like, and the custody split was completely different. It was 50-50. They stayed living in the same city, 15-20 minute drive away from each other. So, very different situation, but adding that like additional dynamic of also, like you say, like I didn't look like my mom didn't look like me, like culturally different too. And I think also maybe this as you've touched on but maybe not said, this disconnection from part of your culture, right? Because that piece from your dad was not there, was not present. And now, and as an adult, reintroducing yourself to that. I mean, what does that feel? You've shared a bit of that, through the ceremony for your grandmother. What made you, I guess, decide I want to do this and I'm going to try, even if it feels awkward and anxious and like I feel so different from everybody else, I guess what made you want to do that?
I mean, I think it's love, right? Like
Yeah.
like I grew up being so proud of, like, even though I was disconnected, like I can remember so many like presentations I gave in school about like what is Lunar New Year and stuff, and like how fun that was for me as a kid.
Yeah.
Like, I don't remember a lot of when my parents were together, but I remember doing Lunar New Year, the four of us in Montreal and Chinatown. And then like
Yeah.
anytime we had Lunar New Year where we were able to be with our dad, or we had February vacation at that time, like that was huge. It was so exciting. And I remember being so, so happy to share my culture with my peers, even if I only understood this very, very, very tiny amount of it.
Yeah.
Um, and as an adult, my journey has been really interesting. I think I do feel this great sense of loss, especially around language, around the Vietnamese
Mm-hmm.
language, and not having been to Vietnam. Like, I have this like very strong desire to do those things. And especially like getting divorced myself, it makes you think about your life. It makes you take stock a bit. And I really was like, it is so important to me to go to Vietnam. And I really was hoping that last year would be the year when I could like spend a few months there. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe in 10 years, we don't know. But I do
Yeah.
hope that I can spend like 6 months, living there and learning and kind of seeing what I feel. And then also, I spent like a year and a half doing everyday Duolingo of Vietnamese. Did it teach me
Oh
Vietnamese?
my gosh.
No, but I made that owl so happy. It taught me some things. And I can actually remember a few summers ago, like going over to my grandma's house and we were picking raspberries together in her front yard, and I saw a bee and I said the word for bee in Vietnamese, and she corrected me so fast. She was like, "You're pronouncing that wrong." But she was really proud of me for doing that, and I was, even though I hadn't learned a lot, I think it was something that was like nice to bond over. And
Yeah.
I would also say that coffee has been a big tool for me to connect to my culture through. I don't
Mm.
have a lot of Vietnamese friends in Vermont, just there's not a lot of Vietnamese people here who are my age,
Mm-hmm.
certainly, who have stayed in Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's really challenging for me to relate to the older generation of Vietnamese people who are
Sure.
immigrants. And also, a lot of them work 7 days a week and
Yeah.
are, just kind of in it. So I think, when I did coffee competition with Vietnamese coffee, that was important to me personally. And it was
Yeah.
important for me to seek out that sponsorship with Nguyen Coffee Supply because I wanted to collaborate with people. I wanted to connect to my culture. And I knew that their brand carries a lot of meaning for people of
Yeah.
my generation who are Vietnamese. And,
Yeah.
I love their company. I love Sarah. And they aren't like they don't come from a coffee background, which is another reason I thought it was so cool because in a lot of ways that represented like bridging gaps for me and like bridging a gap for coffee people to like learn about robusta through processing was one, bridging a
Mm-hmm.
gap between like kind of a commercial geared coffee company and more specialty geared people was huge. And then being able to like share that on the stage, and also since then meeting so many incredible coffee people who are Vietnamese or are of Vietnamese descent like me has been so powerful. Like I never would have had that resource to reach out to people to ask like what's going to happen at a Vietnamese funeral if it weren't for the Vietnamese coffee people who I've met through coffee competitions.
I feel like there has been this, I don't know, maybe in the last 5, 6, 7 years, this like reigniting of pride in Vietnamese coffee.
Oh, for
And it's
sure.
come from like the millennial generation.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see that, and it has then also re-informed people of like the history of coffee in Vietnam and the significance of coffee in Vietnam. And I didn't see your presentation, like your routine for competition, but I remember seeing like you posting about it and sharing on social media. And I just remember, yeah, being like, yeah, I can feel how important that is
Yeah.
of like
I
just
learned so
culturally.
much too, like
Mm-hmm.
getting to learn really like dig into the history of how Vietnam scaled up their coffee production and like learning that that didn't happen until like the 1980s, which is wild because
Mm-hmm.
that's like after some of my family was already like in the US.
Yeah.
Um, and thinking about, I think about this in contrast to some South and Central American countries who have generational farms.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have, you buy coffee as a green coffee buyer of these farmers, where it's like, oh, I'm a fourth generation coffee farmer. This farm has been in my family forever. And I was really interested in specialty coffee. And they tell their
Mm-hmm.
story and it's really
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And you're like, wow, you learned, you went to the city, you came back.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you wanted
Yeah.
to come back. And which is really relevant to the conversation we've been having too, is like cycling back to your like history, your culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
knowing that like scaling up that coffee production didn't happen until the 1980s means that there aren't as many generational farms. And I
Yeah.
think it's been so beautiful to see Vietnam's specialty coffee consuming culture grow. And with that, it's created the very short feedback loop between consumer, barista, and coffee farmer. And seeing how that's increased coffee production quality as well is huge. And I understand the history and the context of why people wrote off
Yeah.
Robusta, why people wrote off Vietnamese coffee, because when our specialty scenes in the US and Australia were just developing, we tried that
Yeah.
coffee and we were like, this is all shit.
Yeah.
And it,
Yeah.
like, I understand it. So getting a more holistic understanding of the history of why that is has been really gratifying. And I feel so proud to be able to tell that story and explain to people, like, why do we think this?
Yeah.
So I also have such a funny, I just cleaned my desk today because it's always a disaster. And my uncle gave me this like instant
Nice.
coffee. I haven't
Cafe
tried it
for
yet. I'm really excited to try it. I'm sure it's crap, but I'm gonna enjoy it anyway.
love that. I love that.
Yeah.
I thank you for sharing so much. I mean, not even just your family's story, but your whole process too of like navigating so many of the things that have happened with, I mean, multiple generations, you know, and the reflection that you've done to better understand and learn. It's I think that's really powerful, and thank you for sharing all of that, because I don't know how often you tell people these things. I don't know how often you have the opportunity and the time and space
Yeah.
to share those insights and things. And so, yeah, that's what this is all about, though. Is
Yeah,
creating
thank you
that
so
space.
much, Madeline.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And it's also really good to see you. It's been a while
I
actually
know, I'm
chatting
like,
with you.
we haven't been on a video call together in years
I
now.
know, in years.
Oh.
But yes, so I just wanted to say, yes, thank you. And yeah, thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Madeline Longoria Garcia, and these are our other stories. You can stream this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And we'll see you next time.